I still remember the exact moment when 300 pairs of eyes turned to look at me as I walked into that waterfront reception hall. The champagne fountain was flowing, crystal chandeliers were sparkling overhead, and a live orchestra was playing something classical and expensive. Everyone was dressed in their finest clothes, laughing and celebrating the happy couple who had just exchanged vows an hour earlier. Brandon stood at the head table in his custom Italian tuxedo, his arm around Amber's tiny waist. She looked absolutely stunning in her designer wedding gown, the kind with thousands of tiny crystals sewn into the bodice that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her veil was still pinned in her perfectly styled blonde hair, and she was glowing with that special kind of happiness that comes from believing you've won at life. I walked through those double doors wearing a red dress I'd bought specifically for this occasion. Not white. I wasn't trying to upstage the bride, just a deep, confident red that made a statement. My heels clicked against the marble floor with each step, and the sound seemed impossibly loud in the suddenly silent room. Someone had actually stopped the music. Brandon saw me first. I watched the color drain completely from his face like someone had pulled a plug and let all the blood run out. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The champagne glass he was holding started to shake in his hand, tiny ripples disturbing the golden liquid inside. Amber looked confused, glancing between Brandon and me, trying to understand why her perfect reception had just screeched to a halt. Some of the guests were whispering to each other, probably the ones who knew who I was. Brandon's father, Richard, was halfway out of his seat, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. I kept walking until I was standing right in front of their table. I was holding a manila folder, nothing fancy, just a regular office folder, but Brandon was staring at it like it contained his death sentence. "Hello, Brandon," I said calmly. My voice didn't shake. I'd practiced this moment in my mind 100 times. "Congratulations on your wedding. It's beautiful. The venue must have cost a fortune. 40,000 for the space alone if I'm not mistaken." He still couldn't speak. Amber finally found her voice. "Who is this?" "Brandon." "Who is she?" "I'm Vanessa," I said, turning to her with a polite smile. "Brandon's wife." "Well, ex-wife. As of 3 days ago, the divorce was finalized on Wednesday." Amber's perfectly made-up face went through several emotions in quick succession. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and then something close to panic. "Ex-wife. He told me you've been divorced for months." "Did he?" I opened my folder and pulled out a single document. "That's interesting because I have the official paperwork right here, dated and stamped. But that's not why I came." Brandon finally managed to speak, his voice coming out as a hoarse whisper. "Vanessa, what are you doing here?" "I came to tell you something important," I said. "Something that really couldn't wait. You see, the moment I signed those divorce papers, I did something I probably should have mentioned. I canceled my authorization on all 10 of your credit cards." The champagne glass slipped from his hand and exploded against the marble floor, sending shards of crystal and champagne spraying across the white tablecloth. Several guests gasped. Amber jumped back, trying to protect her expensive dress, but I kept my eyes on Brandon, watching him process what I'd just said, watching him realize what it meant. "Every single charge for this wedding," I continued in that same calm voice, "was processed on those cards. The venue, the flowers, the catering, the band, the photographer, the cake, the bar service, all of it. And every single charge has been declined." The silence in that room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. "That's not possible," Brandon said, but his voice cracked. "My father paid for." "Your father gave you access to his business account for deposits only," I interrupted. "The balance payments were all supposed to come from your personal cards. Cards that no longer work. The vendors haven't realized it yet because it's a Saturday evening and most of their billing departments are closed. But come Monday morning, you're going to get some very interesting phone calls." Richard Carter stood up so fast his chair fell backward. This is insane. You can't do this. This is sabotage. Actually, it's completely legal, I said, still maintaining that calm tone. As of Wednesday, I'm no longer Brandon's spouse. I have no legal obligation to remain authorized on his credit accounts. I simply removed myself. What he chose to charge after that moment is entirely his responsibility. I turned back to Brandon, whose face had gone from white to a sickly gray color. Let me do the math for you, since math was never your strong subject. The venue balance is $30,000. Catering is $25,000. The band is $8,000. Flowers are $15,000. Photography and videography together are $12,000. The cake is $3,000. The premium bar package is $5,000. And there are about a dozen smaller charges for things like the valet service, the guest transportation, and those custom monogrammed napkins Amber insisted on. Altogether, you're looking at about $100,000 in charges that were declined. Amber made a small choking sound. Several wedding guests had their phones out now, recording everything. This would be all over social media within the hour. But that's not all I came to tell you, I said. And I saw something like hope flicker in Brandon's eyes. Hope that maybe this was the worst of it. I crushed that hope with my next words. I also sent some very interesting documentation to your company's human resources department yesterday afternoon. His face somehow went even paler. You didn't? I did. A complete timeline of your relationship with Amber, including photographs, credit card receipts showing you were using company resources for personal entertainment and copies of emails you sent from your work account. Your company has very strict policies about undisclosed workplace relationships, especially between senior directors and their direct reports. Amber does work in your division, doesn't she? Amber turned to stare at Brandon. You told me I wasn't your direct report. You said we were in different departments. And one more thing, I said, opening my folder one last time. Richard, you might want to see this. It's a forensic accounting report showing how Brandon has been taking unauthorized loans against your business accounts for the past 8 months. Small amounts at first, then increasingly larger. He's been forging your signature on the authorization forms. I pulled out the report and placed it on the table in front of Richard, whose purple face had now turned almost crimson. His hands were shaking as he picked up the papers. Brandon looked at me with something between hatred and disbelief. When did I find out about all of this? I smiled. And it wasn't a kind smile. Brandon, I've known about your affair with Amber for 6 months. I've known about your financial schemes for 4 months. I've been a financial analyst for 12 years. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the discrepancies? Did you honestly believe I was that stupid? The wedding guests were in complete chaos now. Some were recording, some were whispering furiously, some were trying to discreetly leave. The band had packed up and was sneaking out a side door. The photographer had stopped taking pictures and was probably calculating how to get his payment. I closed my folder and tucked it under my arm. Enjoy your reception, Brandon. I hope it was worth it. Then I turned and walked back toward those double doors, my heels clicking against the marble with each step. Behind me, I could hear Amber starting to cry, Richard yelling at Brandon, and the general murmur of 300 people who had just witnessed the most dramatic wedding reception of their lives. But to understand how I got to that moment, how I went from being the trusting wife to the woman who just destroyed her ex-husband's perfect day, I need to go back 6 months back to when everything still seemed normal. And I had no idea that my entire marriage was built on lies. 6 months before that wedding reception, I was sitting at our kitchen table on a Tuesday night going through credit card statements like I did every month. It was just part of my routine. I'd always handled our finances because Brandon claimed he was too busy with work and didn't have a head for numbers. I didn't mind. I actually enjoyed it. There was something satisfying about seeing everything organized, categorized, and balanced. Brandon was upstairs in his home office, supposedly preparing for a big presentation. I could hear him on a phone call, his voice muffled through the ceiling. He'd been working late a lot recently, sometimes not coming home until 10 or 11 at night. When I asked about it, he'd talk about a major client account he was managing, about how much pressure his boss was putting on him, about how this could lead to a promotion. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? We'd been married for 11 years. We had a nice house in a good neighborhood. We took vacations twice a year. We had dinner together most nights when he wasn't working late. Sure, things had become a bit routine, a bit predictable, but that's what marriage was supposed to be like after 11 years, wasn't it? Then I saw the charge for $247 at Bella Rosa, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. The date was June 15th. I remembered that date very clearly because it was the night Brandon had texted me saying he'd be working late and would just grab something at the office. I stared at that line item for a long time. $247 was a lot for one person to spend on dinner. That was a meal for two, probably with wine, maybe dessert. My stomach did a strange little flip, but I pushed the feeling away. Maybe he'd taken a client out. That happens sometimes. He'd just forgotten to mention it. Then I saw another charge. 3 days later, a jewelry store in the mall, $895. I'd never received any jewelry. My birthday wasn't until October. Our anniversary had been in April, and he'd given me a gift card to my favorite bookstore, which I'd actually appreciated because it was thoughtful. So, who was the jewelry for? I went back through the previous month's statement. More restaurant charges on nights he'd claimed to be working late. A hotel charge at the Riverside Inn, a boutique hotel right here in our own city. Why would my husband need a hotel room in the city where we lived? My hands started to shake. I pulled up the statements from 3 months ago, then 4 months ago. The pattern was there once I knew to look for it. Expensive dinners, more jewelry purchases, charges at high-end boutiques, a charge at a spa for a couple's massage package. I sat there at our kitchen table, surrounded by papers, and my laptop, feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. The house we'd built together suddenly felt like a stranger's home. The coffee mug I was holding, the one that said "World's Best Wife" that Brandon had given me as a joke 2 Christmases ago, felt like it was mocking me. I could have confronted him right then. I could have marched upstairs and demanded to know who he was buying jewelry for, who he was taking to expensive restaurants, who he was meeting at hotels in our own city. But something stopped me. Maybe it was my analytical mind. The part of me that always wanted complete information before making decisions. Maybe it was fear of what I'd find out. Maybe it was both. Instead, I very carefully saved all the statements to a private folder on my laptop. Then, I created a new email address Brandon didn't know about and used it to hire a private investigator. His name was Dennis Kim, and his website said he specialized in marital infidelity cases. I felt sick typing out that initial email. Describing my suspicions, attaching copies of the credit card statements. Dennis called me the next day. "Mrs. Carter, based on what you've sent me, I'd say your instincts are correct. This is a very clear pattern. I can start surveillance immediately if you'd like. My rate is $150 an hour, and most cases like this take about 40 to 60 hours to document thoroughly. $9,000 to confirm my husband was cheating on me. $9,000 to have my heart broken. But I said yes anyway because I needed to know the truth. I needed proof. For the next 3 weeks, I lived in a strange state of suspended reality. I went to work every day at the financial consulting firm where I'd worked for 8 years. I came home and made dinner. I asked Brandon about his day. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. I laughed when something was funny. And the entire time I felt like I was watching myself from outside my own body, like I was an actress playing the role of a wife in a marriage that was already over. Dennis sent me his first report after a week. Photographs of Brandon meeting a young blonde woman at a wine bar downtown. More photographs of them having dinner together, sitting close, holding hands across the table. Pictures of them entering the Riverside Inn together at 7 in the evening and not leaving until nearly midnight. The woman's name was Amber Fitzgerald. She was 28 years old. She worked in the marketing department at Brandon's company. According to Dennis's research, she'd been there for 2 years. She lived in a trendy apartment complex near the waterfront and drove a silver Mercedes that was probably beyond her salary range. I looked at those photographs for hours. She was beautiful in that conventional way. Blonde hair, perfect makeup, designer clothes, bright smile. She looked young and exciting and nothing like me with my boring brown hair and sensible work clothes and practical approach to life. I wondered what Brandon said to her. I wondered if he complained about me. I wondered if he told her I didn't understand him. The worst part wasn't even the affair itself. The worst part was realizing how many people must have known. Brandon's co-workers must have seen them together. The hostess at Bella Rosa must have recognized him coming in with different women. The hotel staff at the Riverside Inn must have known he was married to someone else. All these people watching my husband betray me, and no one had said a word. I called my best friend, Patricia. She was a divorce attorney, though I'd never imagined I'd need her professional services. We met for coffee at a place far from my neighborhood, somewhere I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. I need you to look at something, I said, sliding a folder across the table to her. And I need you to tell me what to do. Patricia looked through the photographs and the credit card statements. Her jaw got tighter with each page she turned. When she finished, she looked up at me with fury in her eyes. That absolute piece of garbage. Vanessa, I'm so sorry. What do I do? My voice came out small and broken. Do you want to save the marriage? I thought about that question. I thought about the empty space in our bed where trust used to be. I thought about every lie Brandon had told me over the past months. I thought about Amber's young, beautiful face and the way Brandon smiled at her in those photographs, a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. No, I said, I want to make him pay. Patricia's expression changed. The sympathy was still there, but now there was something else, too. Something sharp and calculating. Then don't confront him yet. Don't let him know you know. Can you do that? I've been doing it for 3 weeks already. Good. Because if you want to really make this hurt, if you want to protect yourself legally and financially, we need to be smart about this. We need to document everything. We need to build an airtight case and we need to wait for exactly the right moment to strike. That's when I stopped being the heartbroken wife and became something else entirely. I became strategic. I became patient. I became dangerous. For the next 2 months, I became someone I barely recognized. Every morning, I woke up next to a man I now knew was a liar. And I smiled at him like nothing was wrong. I asked him how he slept. I made his coffee the way he liked it. I kissed him goodbye when he left for work, and I felt absolutely nothing. Patricia had given me very specific instructions. Document everything, but don't change anything about my behavior. Act completely normal. Don't give him any reason to suspect I knew what he was doing. So, that's exactly what I did. I kept paying all our bills from our joint account like I always had. I kept managing the credit cards. I kept track of every dollar Brandon spent on his affair, watching the numbers climb higher and higher. $800 at another jewelry store. $350 on lingerie at an expensive boutique. Lingerie I certainly never received. A weekend charge at a bed and breakfast 2 hours away that coincided with a business trip Brandon had mentioned. Dennis kept sending me reports, more photographs, more documentation of Brandon and Amber together. They went to the theater. They went to art galleries. They took a cooking class together at some trendy culinary school. I read each report with a strange sense of detachment, like I was reading about strangers instead of my own husband. The most useful thing Dennis discovered was that Brandon had opened 3 new credit cards I didn't know about. He'd used his office address instead of our home address, which is why I'd never seen the statements. But Dennis had connections at various banks and he managed to get copies of those statements, too. Apparently, my husband had racked up nearly $40,000 in debt on those cards alone. Patricia reviewed everything with the precision of a surgeon. "This is actually good for you," she said during one of our secret meetings at her office. "The more debt he accumulates on cards you're not connected to, the better. And the fact that he hid them from you shows intent to deceive. That plays very well in divorce proceedings." "I'm still listed on the other cards though, right?" I asked. "The 10 cards we opened together?" "Yes. You're an authorized user on all of those, which means legally you can remove yourself from them at any time." She gave me a meaningful look, any time at all. I understood what she was suggesting, but I wasn't ready yet. I needed to wait for the perfect moment. I needed Brandon to feel completely secure, completely confident that he'd gotten away with everything. That moment came on a Thursday evening in late August. Brandon came home earlier than usual around 7 o'clock. He seemed nervous, which was unusual for him. He kept fidgeting with his watch and clearing his throat. We were sitting in the living room, me reading a book and him pretending to watch television. Finally, he muted the TV and turned to me. "Vanessa, we need to talk." I looked up from my book, making sure my expression showed nothing but mild curiosity. "About what?" He took a deep breath. "I haven't been happy for a while now. In our marriage, I mean. I think we've grown apart. We want different things. We've become more like roommates than husband and wife." I stayed quiet, letting him talk. This was the speech. He'd probably been rehearsing in his head for weeks. "I think we should get a divorce," he said. And there was something almost relieved in his voice, like he was finally getting to say words he'd been holding in for too long. "I want to be honest with you. I've met someone else, someone who makes me feel alive again, someone who understands me." The audacity of it took my breath away. He was presenting this like he was being noble, like his honesty was some kind of gift. He had no idea I'd known about Amber for 2 months. He had no idea I'd seen photographs of them together dozens of times. He had no idea I'd been preparing for exactly this moment. "I see," I said calmly. "How long has this been going on?" "A few months," he lied smoothly. "Try 6 months," I thought. I didn't want to hurt you, but I can't keep pretending. I deserve to be happy, Vanessa. We both do. You're right, I said. And I watched surprise flicker across his face. He'd expected tears, maybe anger, possibly begging. He hadn't expected agreement. If you're not happy, then divorce is probably the right choice. We shouldn't waste any more of each other's time. He blinked several times. Really, you're okay with this? I'm not thrilled about it, Brandon, but I'm not going to force someone to stay in a marriage they don't want. That wouldn't be fair to either of us. I kept my voice level and reasonable. Should we talk about how to handle this? I assume you'll want to move out. I already found an apartment, he said, and I could hear the eagerness in his voice now. He thought this was going to be easy. He thought I was just going to roll over and let him walk away. I can be out by this weekend, and maybe we could do this amicably without lawyers getting involved. Just split everything 50-50 and move on. No lawyers meant no one examining the credit card statements too closely. No lawyers meant no one discovering all the money he'd spent on Amber. No lawyers meant he could walk away without consequences. Actually, I think we should each have lawyers, I said. Just to make sure everything is done properly. My friend Patricia is an attorney. She can help us with the paperwork. His face tightened slightly. Is that really necessary? Lawyers just make everything more complicated and expensive. I think it's necessary, I said firmly. This is a major legal proceeding, Brandon. We need to do it right. He wasn't happy about it, but he agreed. What choice did he have? Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia drafted divorce papers that were absolutely perfect. On the surface, everything looked fair and standard. We'd split our assets 50-50, no alimony since we both had good jobs. The house would be sold, and we'd divide the proceeds. But buried in the legal language were clauses that protected me completely. Clauses that made it clear I had no responsibility for any debts incurred on accounts I wasn't aware of. Clauses that separated my liability from his on all joint accounts as of the date the divorce was finalized. Patricia had crafted it so carefully that Brandon's lawyer barely glanced at it before approving. Brandon moved out that weekend and I helped him pack his things like we were friends instead of a couple ending an 11-year marriage. He seemed almost giddy talking about his new apartment, his fresh start, his chance to finally be himself. I hope you find happiness, too, Vanessa, he said as he loaded the last box into his car. You deserve someone who appreciates you. The hypocrisy made me want to laugh, but I just nodded and waved as he drove away. What Brandon didn't know was that Dennis had followed him to his new apartment, which was actually Amber's waterfront condo. What he didn't know was that I'd already made copies of every financial document, every credit card statement, every piece of evidence of his affair. What he didn't know was that Patricia had contacts at his company and had already learned about their strict workplace relationship policies. And what he definitely didn't know was what I discovered 2 days earlier when Dennis had delivered his final report. Brandon's father, Richard, had been funding much of his lifestyle through a business account. But Brandon had gotten greedy and had started taking unauthorized loans, forging his father's signature to access larger amounts. Richard had no idea his son had been stealing from him. The divorce papers were signed on a Wednesday in mid-September. I signed my name on the final page with a steady hand, watching the notary stamp the document. It was official. After 11 years, I was no longer Brandon's wife. The moment I walked out of that office, I made my first phone call. I'd like to remove myself as an authorized user on these accounts. I told the credit card company representative, reading off the first card number. Then I called the second company, then the third. By the end of that afternoon, I'd removed myself from all 10 credit cards. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for Brandon to walk right into it. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Dennis sent me a text message with a screenshot attached. It was from Amber's Instagram story, a photo of her hand wearing an enormous diamond engagement ring with the caption, "He finally made it official. Planning the wedding of my dreams." I stared at that ring for a long moment. It must have cost at least $15,000. Brandon had probably put it on one of those credit cards I'd just removed myself from. The charge would go through initially, but when the bill came due, it would be entirely his responsibility. Patricia called me that same evening. "Did you see the Instagram post?" I saw it. Well, it gets better. I had lunch with someone from Brandon's company today. Apparently, Brandon and Amber have been telling everyone they're planning a huge wedding for early October. They've been showing people pictures of venues and talking about how Brandon's father is helping pay for everything. Richard is paying for Brandon to marry his mistress. I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. According to my source, Richard never approved of you. Thought his son married beneath himself. He's apparently thrilled that Brandon is with someone younger and more sophisticated. I felt a flash of anger at that, but I pushed it down. Richard's opinion of me didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that Brandon was about to make the biggest financial mistake of his life and he had no idea it was coming. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Amber's social media obsessively. She posted constant updates about wedding planning, photos of dress shopping with her bridesmaids, videos of cake tastings, pictures of flower arrangements. She tagged the venues, the vendors, the designers. She was documenting everything publicly, probably because she loved the attention and the comments from friends telling her how lucky she was. What she didn't realize was that she was creating a perfect public record of exactly how much this wedding was costing. Dennis did some additional research for me, making phone calls and asking questions. The venue was the Waterfront Estate, one of the most expensive locations in the city. The rental alone was $40,000. They'd hired Bella Rosa, that same Italian restaurant where Brandon had taken Amber on their early dates, to cater the event. $25,000 for 300 guests. The flower budget was astronomical. $15,000 for arrangements that would die after one day. How is he paying for all this? I asked Patricia during one of our regular check-ins. From what I can tell, he put deposits down on everything using his father's business account. That's the authorized charges Richard knows about, but all the balance payments are scheduled to come from Brandon's personal credit cards. The vendors don't care where the money comes from as long as it clears. And Brandon probably figured with his salary he could pay off the cards over time. Except those cards aren't going to work, I said. Except those cards aren't going to work. Patricia agreed with a smile. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday in early October at the Waterfront Estate. The forecast called for perfect weather, sunny, 72 degrees, light breeze off the water. Amber posted about how even the universe was blessing their union. I spent that morning getting ready with more care than I'd taken with my appearance in months. I went to an expensive salon and had my hair styled. I got my makeup done professionally. I bought that red dress I'd been saving for this exact occasion. Bold enough to make a statement, but not so flashy that it would seem like I was trying too hard. Patricia had offered to come with me for moral support, but I declined. This was something I needed to do alone. I arrived at the Waterfront Estate at exactly 6 o'clock, right in the middle of the cocktail hour. The ceremony had ended an hour earlier, and now the guests were mingling on the outdoor terrace, drinking champagne and eating expensive appetizers while the wedding party took photographs by the water. Security at the entrance tried to stop me, but I told them I was a friend of the groom's family. It wasn't technically a lie. I had been married to Brandon for 11 years. I knew Richard and Brandon's mother, Helen. The security guard was young and uncertain, and when I walked past him with confidence, he didn't try to stop me. The venue was absolutely stunning. White chairs arranged in perfect rows overlooking the water. Flower arrangements everywhere, cascading from tall vases on every table. A massive tent with crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. A band was setting up their equipment on a raised stage. Everything was elegant and expensive and perfect. I found a quiet corner and waited. I watched as the wedding party returned from their photo session. Watched as Brandon and Amber made their grand entrance into the reception tent while everyone cheered. I watched them have their first dance. Watched them cut the enormous 5-tier cake. Watched them toast with champagne that probably cost $50 a bottle. Brandon looked so happy. He was smiling. That confident smile I used to know so well. The one that said he was exactly where he wanted to be in life. Amber was glowing, showing off her dress to anyone who would look, taking selfies with her bridesmaids. Richard was holding court at one of the tables, telling stories and laughing loudly. None of them had any idea what was about to happen. The band finished their setup and started playing. More champagne was poured. The catering staff brought out the first course, some kind of fancy soup with truffle oil. Everything was running smoothly, exactly as planned. I checked my watch. It was 7:30. The vendors had all been promised payment by the end of business Friday, which meant the charges would have been attempted yesterday, they'd all been declined. But because it was the weekend, and because it was the actual wedding day, most billing departments wouldn't have processed the failures yet. By Monday morning, all those declined charges would show up in the system, and every vendor would be calling Brandon, demanding immediate payment. But I wasn't going to let him wait until Monday to find out. I took the folder I'd been holding, the one containing printouts of every declined charge, every credit card statement, every piece of evidence I'd been collecting for months. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my red dress, and stepped out of my corner. The moment I started walking across that reception tent, heading straight for the head table where Brandon and Amber were sitting, people started to notice. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Someone actually gasped. The band stopped playing. Brandon looked up and saw me walking toward him. I watched his face change from confusion to recognition to absolute horror. The champagne glass in his hand started to shake. Amber looked between us, her smile faltering. "Brandon, who is that?" I reached their table and stopped, standing there in my red dress with my folder in hand, looking down at the man who had betrayed me and the girl who had helped him do it. "Hello, Brandon," I said, my voice calm and clear in the sudden silence. "Congratulations on your wedding. It's beautiful. The venue must have cost a fortune. 40,000 for the space alone, if I'm not mistaken. 300 people were watching us now. 300 people were about to witness what happened when you betrayed someone who was smarter than you thought." Brandon's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The champagne glass slipped from his trembling hand and shattered against the marble floor, sending crystal shards skittering across the white tablecloth. Amber jumped back with a small scream, grabbing at her expensive dress to keep it away from the spreading liquid. "Vanessa." Brandon finally managed to choke out. "What are you doing here?" I placed my folder on the table in front of him, right next to the elaborate centerpiece that probably cost 300. "I came to deliver some important information. You see, when I signed those divorce papers 3 weeks ago, I made a few phone calls. I removed myself as an authorized user from all 10 of the credit cards we shared." The color drained from his face so quickly, I thought he might actually faint. Around us, guests were leaning forward in their seats, straining to hear every word. Several people had their phones out recording. This would be on social media within minutes. "Every charge for this wedding," I continued speaking slowly and clearly so everyone could hear, "was processed on those cards. The venue balance, the catering, the flowers, the band, the photographer, the cake, the bar service, the valet parking, those custom napkins with your names embroidered on them, all of it. And every single charge has been declined." Amber's face went white. "That's not possible, Brandon. Tell her that's not possible." But Brandon couldn't speak. He was staring at the folder like it contained a bomb. "Let me break down the numbers for you," I said, opening the folder and pulling out the first sheet of paper. The venue balance of 30,000 declined. Catering for 300 guests at 25,000 declined. Premium bar package at 5,000 declined. Flowers at 15,000 declined. The band at 8,000 declined. Photography and videography at 12,000 declined. That custom wedding cake at 3,000 declined, and about a dozen smaller charges for things like transportation, the ceremony musician, and the program printing. Altogether, Brandon, you're looking at approximately 100,000 in declined charges. Someone in the crowd let out a low whistle. Richard had stood up from his table, his face turning that familiar shade of purple. "This is absurd. I authorized the deposits. The vendors were paid." "The deposits were paid," I agreed, turning to face him. "But deposits only cover a fraction of the total cost. The balance payments were all scheduled to come from Brandon's personal credit cards, cards that no longer work. The vendors' billing departments are closed for the weekend, so they haven't processed the failures yet. But come Monday morning, every single one of them is going to be calling Brandon, demanding immediate cash payment." Amber turned to Brandon, her voice rising to a near shriek. "You told me everything was paid for. You told me your father was covering everything." "I covered the deposits," Richard said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Brandon was supposed to handle the rest with his own funds. He told me he had it covered." "Oh, he had it covered," I said. "He just didn't realize the coverage was about to be pulled out from under him." I pulled out another sheet of paper. "But that's not all I came to tell you. Brandon, Do you remember that company policy you signed when you were promoted to senior director? The one about disclosing workplace relationships? His face went even paler, something I hadn't thought possible. I sent a complete report to your Human Resources Department yesterday afternoon. A timeline of your relationship with Amber, including the fact that she works in your division and reports to your direct subordinate. Photographs of you together during work hours. Credit card receipts showing you used your corporate card for personal entertainment with her. Copies of emails you sent from your work account making dinner plans and hotel reservations. Amber's hand flew to her mouth. You said we were being careful. You said no one at work knew. Everyone at work knew. I said bluntly. They just didn't report it because they assumed you'd already disclosed it properly. But you didn't, did you, Brandon? Because that would have required you to actually follow the rules. The wedding guests were in complete chaos now. People were whispering frantically. Phones were recording from every angle, and I could see several people texting, probably sharing this drama in real time with friends who weren't here. Your HR department takes these violations very seriously. I continued, especially when they involve senior management. I suspect you'll be hearing from them very soon about a disciplinary review, possibly termination, depending on how they interpret the evidence. Brandon finally found his voice, though it came out as a hoarse croak. You vindictive. I'm not finished, I interrupted, pulling out the last document from my folder. Richard, this one's for you. It's a forensic accounting report showing unauthorized transactions from your business accounts over the past 8 months. Small amounts at first, 2,000 here, 3,000 there, then increasingly larger sums, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 altogether. Your son has stolen approximately 95,000 from your business. I placed the report on the table in front of Richard. His hands were shaking as he picked it up. His eyes scanning the pages. With each line he read, his face grew darker. The signatures on the authorization forms are forged, I continued. I hired a handwriting expert to verify it. Brandon has been taking loans against your business without your knowledge or permission. That's embezzlement, Richard. That's a crime. Richard looked up from the papers, his eyes fixed on his son with an expression of absolute betrayal. You stole from me, from your own father? Brandon's mouth worked soundlessly. Amber had backed away from him, her hands pressed against her face, her carefully applied makeup starting to run as tears leaked from her eyes. How did you even? Brandon started, but his voice cracked. When did I figure it out? I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. Brandon, I'm a financial analyst. I've been one for 12 years. Did you really think I wouldn't notice discrepancies in credit card statements? Did you honestly believe I was too stupid to see what was right in front of me? The band leader was quietly directing his musicians to pack up their instruments. The catering staff had retreated to the kitchen. The photographer had stopped taking pictures and was backing toward the exit. They all knew what was coming. A massive fight over who was going to pay them for services already rendered. I've known about your affair with Amber for 6 months, I said, my voice carrying across the silent tent. I hired a private investigator. I documented everything. Every dinner, every hotel visit, every piece of jewelry you bought her with money from our joint accounts. I watched you lie to my face every single day. And I didn't say a word because I was waiting for exactly the right moment to make you pay for what you did. Amber was fully crying now. Her perfect wedding day crumbling around her. 6 months. Brandon, you said you only just left her. You said the divorce only happened because she was cold and boring and didn't understand you. Is that what he told you? I turned to her with something almost like pity. That's interesting because he told me he'd only met you a few months ago. How long have you actually been together, Brandon? 8 months? 9? He didn't answer. He was staring at the papers spread across the table at the evidence of his own destruction laid out in black and white. Richard stood up, the forensic report clutched in his fist. You forged my signature. You stole from my business. You humiliated this family. His voice was shaking with rage. You're done. You're finished. I'll see you prosecuted for this. Dad, please. Brandon finally found his voice, reaching toward his father. Don't call me that, Richard snarled. I don't have a son who's a thief. The wedding guests were scrambling now, some trying to leave discreetly, others openly recording the spectacular implosion happening at the head table. I could see Amber's bridesmaids gathering around her, trying to comfort her while she sobbed into her hands. The best man was on his phone, probably calling someone for advice. I picked up my folder and tucked it back under my arm. I think my work here is done. Wait, Brandon said, and there was something desperate in his voice now. Vanessa, please. We can fix this. We can figure something out. Don't do this. I looked at him for a long moment. This man I'd spent 11 years of my life with. This man who'd promised to love and cherish me and had broken that promise without a second thought. I'm not doing anything, Brandon. I simply removed myself from your credit accounts, which is my legal right. I simply reported workplace policy violations to the appropriate department, which is my civic duty. I simply provided Richard with evidence of financial fraud, which is the right thing to do. Everything that's happening right now is the consequence of your own choices. I turned and started walking toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear Amber's sobs getting louder. Richard's angry voice demanding explanations and the general chaos of 300 wedding guests who just witnessed the most dramatic event of their social lives. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I walked out of that beautiful venue out into the cool October evening. The sun was setting over the water, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was objectively a perfect evening for a wedding. I got into my car and sat there for a moment. My hands resting on the steering wheel. I'd expected to feel triumphant, maybe vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired and free. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Did you do it? I did it. I typed back. How do you feel? I thought about that question. How did I feel? Not happy, exactly. Not sad either. Just complete, like I'd finished something that needed to be finished. I feel like I can finally move forward, I wrote. 3 months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances what had happened in the aftermath. Brandon had been fired from his job for the policy violations and the scandal. Richard had pressed charges for the embezzlement, though eventually dropped them. When Brandon agreed to pay back every penny with interest, the wedding vendors had sued for payment and won judgments against him. He declared bankruptcy. Amber had filed for annulment after 3 weeks of marriage, claiming fraud. Apparently, she hadn't signed up to be married to an unemployed bankrupt with a criminal record and massive debt. As for me, I got a promotion at work. I moved into a smaller apartment that was entirely mine, decorated exactly how I wanted. I started taking painting classes on weekends. I went on dates with kind, honest men who didn't make me question every word they said. And sometimes when I was feeling reflective, I'd think about that moment in the reception tent when Brandon's perfect new life fell apart in front of 300 witnesses. I'd think about the look on his face when he realized I'd been 10 steps ahead of him the entire time. I never regretted what I did. He'd made his choices. And I'd simply made sure he faced the consequences. That wasn't revenge. That was justice. And justice, I'd learned, was the best way to move forward.